Okay, let's unpack this. We have a transfer saga unfolding right now in the Premier League that is less a long, drawn-out courtship and more a financial sprint against a deadline.
Exactly. It's high stakes.
It really is. It's a negotiation where one date and one exact monetary figure basically controls the destiny of a player and, the spending plans of some of the biggest clubs in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So today, we are diving into the high-pressure situation surrounding the Bournemouth forward, Antoine Semenyo.
And this is such a fascinating scenario for anyone following the transfer market because it just strips away all the usual months of back and forth, and it boils it down to pure leverage and timing.
Pure leverage, I like that.
Semenyo is a player who is highly in demand, and he is set to decide his future very, very soon. The urgency here isn't based on an injury or a tactical need. It's all dictated by a contract, a mechanism.
Right, so our mission today is to give you a clear roadmap for this deep dive. We need to identify the key contenders, who's at the table, understand why Semenyo is suddenly the target, and most importantly, dissect that single crucial financial detail that is forcing Manchester's elite clubs to move so fast.
The expiring release clause.
That's the one. It's this rare, hard deadline in what's normally a really fluid market.
And understanding that mechanism is absolutely key to understanding the pressure. In this case, Bournemouth has temporarily given up control over the price, but they're about to get it back.
In a matter of days.
Exactly. And that shift in power is what's creating this whole frantic atmosphere.
Okay, so let's start with the big question. Why Semenyo and why now? Our sources are very clear that all this interest comes directly from his performance.
Oh, absolutely.
He's elevated his status this season to the point where he's, unanimously deemed a top-level Premier League-ready option. And that's the golden ticket, isn't it?
It's the highest compliment you can pay a player in the mid-table. It means he isn't a project. He's not a player who's going to need a massive transition period.
Right.
For clubs like Manchester United or Manchester City who are competing for titles, the single biggest risk in January is bringing in a player who takes 6 months to adapt.
Exactly. When you spend this kind of money, and we're talking figures north of £60 million, the buyers demand an immediate impact. You're essentially paying a premium to skip the learning curve.
You are.
And Semenyo has shown consistently that he can handle the physicality, the pace, all of it. He's validated production.
That validation completely changes the risk assessment. I mean, a typical January signing might be some young talent from, say, the Bundesliga.
Right, there's always a risk there.
A huge risk, maybe a 40% chance of a high-cost flop. But when the player is already proven in the PL, that risk drops to maybe 10, 15%. And that shift is what lets the fee climb to this elite level.
It sets the baseline. His performance is the foundation that justifies this whole frenzy. But the interest is only half the story. We need to look at the battlefield, who is actually making moves right now.
Well, the landscape is tactically split, and it reveals some really different approaches. You have two clubs that are actively trying to control things and get him now, and then you have a calculated predator just sort of waiting in the shadows.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because the active bidders are, predictably, the two Manchester Giants.
Of course.
Both Manchester United and Manchester City are described as actively pushing to sign Semenyo. That means formal inquiries, deep financial planning, and serious interest on the table. It's a direct showdown.
The fact that both are pushing hard signifies two things, probably for two different reasons. For United, I think it suggests an immediate need. They might see Semenyo as the perfect piece to solve a tactical problem.
Depth, maybe, or an upgrade.
Could be either, but they need it solved yesterday if they want to salvage the second half of their season. Their push is likely driven by that urgency.
And what about City's push? Is it purely tactical, or is there a bit of, making sure their rivals don't get a key player?
City's strategy is usually much cooler, much more calculated. If they're actively pushing, it's because Semenyo has passed their stringent data analysis.
Their models.
Right. Their models for tactical fit, squad sustainability, all of it. They're likely moving with precision. Maybe they've already got personal terms mapped out, just ready to execute. They don't do panic buys.
So their interest really legitimizes his value.
It does. Now, contrast those two with the third party, Liverpool. The sources confirm Liverpool did make contact back in November.
So they were in early.
Very early. But crucially, there has been no follow-up yet. They're currently just watching the chaos. But, and this is important, The source notes they could become active before the window closes if the situation opens up.
So they're an opportunist here.
A classic example of strategic reserve. Liverpool has put their marker down. They've signaled to the player and the club that they're interested, but they're playing the long game. They're letting United and City bid against each other.
Waiting for that deadline to pass, maybe.
It's a high-risk, high-reward strategy because if United or City pull the trigger quickly,
Liverpool misses out completely.
entirely, it shows a lot of confidence in their own recruitment plan. And then you have Tottenham, who are, well, they're largely out of the picture. The sources are pretty definitive. Spurs are currently not advancing in talks.
Unlikely, then.
Very unlikely, unless there's a dramatic change.
So we can pretty much take Tottenham out of this for now. The story for the next few days is all about the two Manchester clubs' urgency versus precision, and Liverpool waiting to see if this deadline creates some instability.
And this brings us right to the core of this deep dive. These strategic decisions aren't just random. They are totally constrained by that financial mechanism. This is where we get into the countdown clock.
The single most important detail in all the source material is the fact that Semenyo has a 65 million con release clause. Now, that's a hefty price tag.
It is, but it's manageable for these clubs.
Right. But the real power of that number is tied to its lifespan.
This is so critical for you to understand the leverage here. A release clause fixes the maximum price a club has to pay. And in this case, the sources stress that this specific clause expires on January 10th.
That specific date.
That date is the immutable center of the entire negotiation.
So January 10th is the cliff edge. Explain the so what here. What actually happens legally and financially on January 11th?
Well, if a club triggers the clause, formally commits to paying the $65 million before the end of business on the 10th, Bournemouth has no choice. They have to accept the fee.
The power is with the buyer.
Completely. The buyer dictates the transaction based on that predefined cost. As long as the player agrees, the deal is done. Fixed price.
But the moment that clock ticks over midnight on the 10th?
The power shifts instantly. If that clause expires, Bournemouth immediately regains full control of negotiations.
So the 65 million just becomes, what, a memory?
It becomes the starting point, not the price cap. And given that we know two of the richest clubs in the world are actively pushing, what do you think happens then?
They enter a blind auction.
Precisely. Bournemouth, knowing they have a PL-proven player wanted by both United and City, not to mention Liverpool lurking, they can and absolutely will push that price higher.
And the sources say that could happen.
The sources confirm it. It could push the price even higher. We could be looking at that 65 million climbing to 75, maybe even 80 million by the end of January.
Wow. So that's the fascinating calculation the Manchester clubs are facing. Pay 65 million now, which is high, but it's guaranteed.
Or wait.
Or wait, and risk it inflating by 10 million or more in a week, plus you get a bidding war.
It forces them to accelerate everything. It's not just about agreeing the fee. They need to finalize personal terms, schedule a medical, complete all the paperwork to trigger the clause, all in a tiny window.
The pressure on those transfer teams must be immense.
It's huge. And it also gives Semenyo enormous leverage in his own negotiations. If he knows United needs him before the 10th to save 10 million quid.
He can demand higher wages, better bonuses.
Of course, because he holds the key to that price cap.
That's where his perspective becomes so central. So United, driven by this urgency, might be forced to overpay on personal terms just to lock in that 65 million fee.
That's the cost of urgency. They get their man, they save the potential 10 to 15 million they'd lose if they waited, but they might concede too much in the contract.
And what about City?
City, driven by precision, is probably planning every step so they don't move a second earlier than they have to. But they absolutely cannot risk missing that deadline. It is a pure game of chicken.
A multi-million-pound game of chicken. So what does this all mean for us watching this unfold? It means the next few days are absolutely crucial.
It's not a slow burn.
No, it's a time-sensitive financial operation. Will United, maybe the most desperate for that quick fix, move first and lock in the price? Or will City's calculated approach see them move with surgical precision right before the deadline?
And you can't forget Liverpool. If the 10th passes with no deal, Semenyo is still at Bournemouth, the price goes up, and suddenly Liverpool's waiting strategy looks pretty smart.
They can come in fresh.
Exactly. The Manchester clubs might be exhausted, and Liverpool can come in with a strong package after the initial frenzy has died down.
The story here is just completely driven by time and finance. Semenyo's future is going to be decided very soon, simply because this deadline demands that these massive clubs make a choice about price certainty. This is easily the most urgent transfer to watch.
The dynamic is so volatile because the consequence of failing to act by the 10th is so financially punitive. It forces clarity, it forces commitment. We are watching a mechanism that's designed to compress a month of negotiation into a single high-pressure week.
Right. And we've spent a lot of time analyzing the club decisions, United's pressure, City's calculation, Liverpool's patience. But as we wrap up, let's bring it all back to the man at the center of the storm, Semenyo himself.
It's so easy to view the player as just the prize, but you're right, he holds the ultimate veto power over this clause.
That's it. He knows the timeline. He knows how desperately United and City need him to agree terms before January 10th to guarantee that price. So here's the final thought for you to consider. Given this immense urgency, what kind of concrete performance guarantees or long-term role assurances would be necessary for Semenyo to commit before that deadline, knowing that waiting just a few extra days might bring him even greater financial options and maybe more clarity on his role if the price rises?
That's a powerful thought. For a player, the certainty of a massive, immediate move in a defined role at, say, a Manchester club that has to be weighed against waiting past the 10th. Waiting might get him a few extra million pounds, sure, but it also risks turning his future into a messy, protracted negotiation later in the month.
So it's a choice between money and certainty.
It forces him and his agent to prioritize. Is it about the absolute financial maximum, or is it about career certainty right now? And only he can make that call.